So welcome everyone. So we are happy to be here at African Leadership University, and we are thrilled to welcome Fred Swaniker, which is the founder of African Leadership University. So thank you for hosting us, Fred. We are here in Mauritius in one of your campus. So I'm sure you are going to tell us about more about your entrepreneur venture and how did you start. Okay. Can you perhaps introduce yourself, Fred?
Welcome everybody to the campus of the African Leadership University in Mauritius. By way of introduction, I'm originally from Ghana, but I think of myself as an African because I left Ghana when I was 4, and every 4 years of my life I moved to a new country in Africa. So I lived in Gambia, and then Botswana, and then Zimbabwe, and South Africa, and then I moved to Mauritius 3 years ago. So I feel at home everywhere on the continent, and my big passion is Africa and seeing how we can really transform it.
Did you always dream of being an entrepreneur?
No, not at all. Growing up, like most families in Africa, I had a sense that entrepreneurship was actually a bit of a dirty word, right? So whenever people came to the house, if they were a doctor, they were a lawyer, or an engineer, my parents were like, yeah, these are the people that you need to be like. You need to become a doctor, engineer, and if they were an entrepreneur, then they gave me the sense that this person is sort of shady. The only reason they're an entrepreneur is because they couldn't get a job. So I never expected that I would be an entrepreneur, and it's not something that I looked towards doing. But so I'd say that I became an entrepreneur by accident. I became an entrepreneur really through frustration, with seeing many of the things that I saw around me in Africa that I thought could be better. And what drove me to eventually become an entrepreneur is really my desire to solve some of these pain points that I saw in Africa. So that's why I say that Africa is an entrepreneur's paradise, because many entrepreneurs are driven not simply by a desire to make money, but because they want to solve problems. And so if you want to see lots of problems, come to Africa. Right? So therefore Africa really is, I think, an entrepreneur's paradise, because there's so many problems that need to be solved that no one else has solved yet. And that's how I became an entrepreneur.
I follow this point. What inspired you to start African Leadership University?
Well, one of the things that I came to see as I lived in different countries in Africa was that we have a lot of potential on the continent. But the one thing that was stopping us from achieving this potential was that our people didn't have the education that they needed, right? And also that the leaders that we had were not of the right quality, right? So I began about 15 years ago something called the African Leadership Academy, which is a high school in South Africa that selects the most talented young people in every country in Africa. We bring them together for 2 years to develop their talents and their leadership and entrepreneurial skills, and to get them into top universities around the world. So that has been going on for almost 15 years now. And about 5 years ago, after seeing the impact of the work we're doing, we had 250 young people at a time coming to that academy. Most of them would leave that academy and go to universities outside of Africa. They would go to universities in the USA and Europe and everything. And so after a while, I got frustrated again. I said, why don't we have world-class universities in Africa? Our own Stanfords and Harvards and Yales and Cambridge and Oxford that could be on the continent. And also we would get thousands of applications to that academy, but we can only take a couple of hundred of them. And so we realized that we needed to do it at a bigger scale and to do it at the university level. And that's what then inspired me to think about building a new form of university that would be more relevant to Africa's needs and to be more relevant to the 21st century, and to really reimagine what a university would look like in the 21st century. Because the nice thing about starting a business in Africa is that you don't have to replicate what has been done in other parts of the world. You can really start from scratch, because we don't have legacy. So I thought, actually, let's use this, because most universities haven't changed for 700 years. And because we don't have the infrastructure of existing universities, we thought, could we use this platform to build the university for the future, not the universities for the past? And then that's really what led us to start ALU.
Good. What is your big area or your ambitious goal here at LAU?
Well, the big challenge that we're trying to solve is leadership development and talent development for Africa at scale, right? And we need to do that at scale and at speed, right? And also in a resource constrained environment, because we don't have a lot of money in Africa, right? So Africa's population is the fastest growing in the world, and is slated to be 40% of the world's population by the end of this century. So can you imagine 40% of all the people on planet Earth are going to be African? By 2035, which is just 17 years from now, we're going to have the largest workforce in the world. 1.1 billion people are going to need jobs in Africa. But if you convert those 17 years into days, it's only 6,000 days. In fact, it's less than 6,000 days from today, where we're going to have the largest workforce in the world. So what we realized that if you're going to develop talent in Africa, you have to do it at scale. And you have to do it quickly, because we don't have time. So our big, hairy, audacious goal at ALU is to develop 3 million leaders in Africa in the next 6,000 days. And to do it in an unconventional way. So I like to think of it as a moonshot, right? A moonshot for leadership development, for education in Africa. Really to say, how can you, in a short period of time, develop human potential at a faster pace and a higher quality and at a lower cost than has ever been done before. Because that's what this continent needs. If we don't find a way to unlock our human potential and to drive leadership and entrepreneurship, then who's going to create the jobs for those 1 billion people that will need it? So what we're trying to do is really create a group of leaders and entrepreneurs who have the highest caliber, who will address Africa's biggest challenges and greatest opportunities. So we've identified what we call the 7 great challenges of Africa and the 7 great opportunities. And these are big issues that we need to solve, but also these are where the entrepreneurial solutions are going to come from, right? Because behind every challenge is an entrepreneurial opportunity, right? And so we want this 3 million leaders that we're going to develop to be the ones to come up with the big innovations, the entrepreneurial ventures, the leadership that is going to provide opportunity for the 1 billion who will need the jobs and the livelihood in the next 6,000 days.
Wow, 3 million people to form from LAU. It's a good challenge. So we hope so that you will succeed.
Thank you. I hope so too.
Why did you choose Mauritius to put your first campus? Because I think it's your first campus in Africa, in Mauritius.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, ALU is an extension of the leadership development infrastructure that we started in South Africa, right? But it's the first, university within that infrastructure. And when, part of my philosophy is that when you're starting something in Africa, you need to go where the headaches are fewest, not where the market is biggest, right? Because, one would say, well, Mauritius is a tiny market, 1.1 million people. You're not going to have too many students there for a university. But when you're starting something new, there's so many aspects of your model that you're trying to figure out, right? You're trying to figure out your human capital, your staffing, your product, you're trying to understand your customer, you're trying to, deal with government regulation, all these things. So you don't want to, at the same time, be distracted by all these things that are not core to your business, like corruption, and you don't have electricity, you don't have water, you don't have internet access. These are things that, it's not your core business. The next thing, you have to build a power plant because you don't have the power for your business. So in looking around, for example, when I originally started working on the university, because the academy was based in South Africa, I set up a small team there to start the project. And I had 40 people, but 20 of them were stuck outside of South Africa because they couldn't get work permits. And I remember coming to Mauritius, the Board of Investment invited me to visit. And they provided a car to pick me up and to take me around for a week to see anyone that I wanted to see, to meet the ministers, to meet, the Tertiary Education Commission, all these people. They were really trying to facilitate.
It's not working, sorry.
Is it working? It's working. I think they're trying to record me. It's not for the room. Can you hear me in the room?
Yes.
Okay. They were really trying to facilitate my, coming into the country. And one of the meetings I had where I really realized that maybe Mauritius is the place to come. I met the Board of Investment, and I came from South Africa where 20 of my staff were stuck outside of the country because they couldn't get work permits. And the Board of Investment here was apologizing to me about how they could no longer process work permits in 3 days. And they said, oh, now it's taking us 2 weeks. I said, okay, you know what? I'll take 2 weeks because in South Africa it's never. So we moved here with 40 staff, and we had work permits for them in a month, and now we have, we grew to about 200 people. The other thing I like about Mauritius is the fact that it's safe, it's secure, and so when you're starting a university like this, you want parents to rest assured that their children are going to be in a safe environment. It has good infrastructure. As I mentioned, I didn't want to be distracted with, do I have electricity, do I have water, do I have internet access? Mauritius had all those things. The fact that they removed visas for 50 out of 54 countries in Africa also make it attractive, because if you have parents and you want them to come and visit their students, you don't have to worry about, are they going to now have to go through all these hassles to get visas? And also even just because, so for me, Mauritius is not just about, it wasn't just about setting up our first university. It was also about looking at where would be the headquarters for the entire ALU project, because we're building campuses all across Africa. And so I wanted to know, where can I base myself to do that? And the fact that if I want to have a meeting with my management team, and I've got executives all across Africa, they can be here tomorrow, right? They don't have to go and get visas and all that kind of stuff. They can come in and out. If you're hiring staff and you want to have them trained, you can send them here and they can get trained, and then you can send them off to other places. You don't have to worry about, where you're going to worry about work permits, right, or visas. And then also foreign exchange controls. When you are running a Pan-African enterprise, you want to be able to, get cash in and out and send it to all the different countries where you're operating. Mauritius doesn't have foreign exchange controls. For example, in South Africa, I remember a few years ago, one of my employees who was based in Tanzania or something, we needed to reimburse them for expenses, $500. And we had to apply to the South African Reserve Bank and send the receipts from that employee for the $500 before we could transfer money to them. Like, how do you do business in that kind of environment? So coming to Mauritius, and then the second side we went to Rwanda, same thing. We've chosen the 2 countries in Africa that rank the highest in terms of ease of doing business in Africa, right? So now that we are, we've incubated the model, we've perfected it, it's still not perfect, but we've worked on it in many ways. And you figured out a lot of the kinks. Now we can start going to the more adventurous countries, where you now have the mind share to deal with these other distractions. But Mauritius was a really good base to start, and I don't regret coming here at all. So it was not for tax. That's the last thing.
Okay. How is LAU different from traditional universities?
Well, as I mentioned here, LAU, we're trying to completely reimagine university education because the context that we find ourselves in Africa is unique, right? So there are a few things that are different. The first is the fact that, we looked at how one of the biggest challenges when you're opening a university is your faculty. Who is going to be your professors, your teachers, right? So that's the thing that, the first thing that comes to mind when you're like, okay, I'm going to have a university. What do you need? You need professors. Now, it takes 15 to 20 years to develop someone into a PhD, right? In Africa, we don't have a lot of professors with PhDs. Right? So initially, when I thought about the idea of building a university, I thought, well, this is not a problem we can solve in the time that we have. So I thought maybe someone else will figure this out. Our grandchildren will figure this out because we don't have enough professors. So how are we going to build a university? But then eventually, then when all this disruption started happening with, with online education and things like that, I realized that there was an opportunity to actually rethink the way we delivered education, right? So, because before, information and knowledge was a scarce commodity, right? So in order to get it, you had to go to a physical space with a professor who had all that information in their head, or to go into a library to get in the book. And that was how you learned, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Now, universities haven't caught up to the 21st century. And they still, most universities, that's how you learn. You still go and you learn from that professor and from that library book. So what we realized that we had an opportunity to do was to really think about reimagining the learning to make it not dependent on a scarce resource, which is professors with PhDs, but on an abundant resource, which is students, right? So we flip the focus of the learning from being professor-centric to student-centric, where the students learn by themselves using technology, right? So I went to Stanford for my MBA. I had a great experience there, but if I think about all the professors that I had over 2 years, there were maybe 30 professors, but only 3 of them were really brilliant teachers. And if you think back to your own university education, I'm sure you can count 1 or 2 professors that were great. So why do we force students to learn from those professors at that university? With technology today, you can pick the best of the best in the world. And you can find those 3 professors at Harvard who are amazing. Find the 3 professors at ESSEC who are great. Find the 3 at, some university in Singapore who are great, right? And you can bring them together in one place using technology. You can even think about using virtual reality, right, to attend those professors' classes, right? So now you're getting the best of the best in one place, and you're learning by yourself. There's also the opportunity to do peer-to-peer learning, right, where you get the students to teach each other. Because if you have to explain something to someone else, it makes you learn it better yourself, right? And then they can learn from experts. They can interview experts in the field. They can learn from projects. They can learn from internships. So we're really saying you have to disaggregate the learning from just being dependent on one person, this is a professor, to being driven by the student, where the student is the center of an ecosystem where they can get access to all this knowledge. So this is very important. This is not an online university. It's a physical university, right, as you can see here. But the learning model is one which is dependent on the students in that space, teaching themselves, teaching each other, working on projects together, and so forth. So that's one of the things that's really distinctive. And with that, it means it's entirely scalable, because you've removed the bottleneck to scale. Now, because we don't, one thing, there's no shortage of students. We have, millions of brilliant students in Africa, and you bring them together and you can open. So we can therefore open a new university in a matter of 3 months. Traditionally it would take a university decades. Years to open. So we can open a university in 3 months. The other thing that is different is the emphasis on entrepreneurship and leadership, right? We want everyone here to not come out looking for a job, but to go out and create their own jobs, right? We want them to think about, everyone here has to go through entrepreneurship training, because we're moving to a world with artificial intelligence and automation and so forth, where many jobs are being lost, right? And you need to be able to create your own jobs. And so we want to really equip these students to be able to do that. And we're also are getting away from the traditional notions of academic majors, for example, right? So, traditionally when you go to a university, they give you a menu of disciplines: Bachelor of Arts in History, Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, and you have to pick from that menu. But very often that menu has nothing to do with your passions, and also has very little to do with the job that you're going to do, because the jobs of tomorrow have not been created yet. We don't know what they are. So why are we trying to predict by making you study a narrow academic discipline? And how many of you in this room are doing a job that is related to what you studied in college? It's probably very few, right? Yeah. So why do we force people to choose from a menu that has nothing to do with their future? So in our case, what we said is actually we want them to not pick from a menu of academic disciplines. We want them to pick from a menu of problems. So we ask them to look at these 7 challenges and opportunities that we face in Africa. And we say, don't declare a major, but declare a mission for your life. What problem do you want to solve? And then you curate your own learning experience around that problem that you want to solve. So you decide what you want to take. You decide what online courses you want to take related to that subject. So you want to figure out how to solve healthcare in Africa, right? So you will then decide, okay, over the next 3 years, I'm going to take these 5 online courses, one from Harvard School of Public Health, one from Yale, one from Oxford, one from University of Cape Town, around healthcare. Then I'm going to travel to 20 different rural areas to look at how they are dealing with healthcare. Right? I'm going to interview 50 healthcare professionals to learn from them and understand what they're doing. I'm going to read 25 books on the subject. I'm going to go and do a prototype. I'm going to go to 50 conferences. And I'm going to, and you map out your whole learning model, experience. And then at the end of you've got a great network in the field in that you want to work in. You have a portfolio of evidence showing the things you've actually done, not just things that you have theorized about. And then you publish a thesis. So it's almost like doing a PhD, but as an undergraduate, right? Where you pick the problem you want to solve and then you curate your own learning experience around it. Right? And what that does is it creates problem solvers. So what we're trying to get developed in these young people is not memorization of facts and figures, because you quickly forget those. We want to develop them as problem solvers, because once they're problem solvers, then they can always solve new problems as the world changes. So when artificial intelligence makes their job irrelevant, they will be able to solve new problems and they will be able to remain relevant. And so for us, we don't want to we don't want our students to memorize facts. We want them to develop skills and to develop the ability to solve problems. And then that's when they go out to the world, and we think that they will be really relevant for the 21st century. And this is how we believe education should be done, not just in Africa, but really for the whole world. We think that this is really a global innovation in education, not just an African innovation.
We have to disrupt the education, and I think this is what we are doing, and this is the vision of future. Yeah. So now let's focus a little bit about your entrepreneurship. As a lot of entrepreneurs are watching us, it's always good to say perhaps, have you failed as an entrepreneur before starting LAU?
Never. Any failures. This has always been very smooth and perfect, and I sleep 10 hours a day and everything always works. No. Of course, there have been tremendous failures. I mean, I think that the one thing there's only one thing that you can be sure of as an entrepreneur, and that is that you're going to fail. Whatever your plan is, the minute you start implementing it, it's not going to work, right? So that's one thing you absolutely can be sure of. So, for example, when I wrote the business plan for the African Leadership Academy, which was the precursor to the university, when I was doing my MBA at Stanford. And when I graduated, the first thing that we did was to start a pilot of this academy. So we said we're going to run a summer program. And so I did a projection for that first summer program, and we said we're going to bring 150 students. They're going to come from all around Africa and around the world. We were doing it in Cape Town at the time to test the academy. And it was going to be a 2-month version of what we wanted to do later on. And they were going to pay $4,000 each. So we projected we were going to get $600,000 in revenue. And so I went and rented out some facilities, a small hotel that they would stay in and everything. And as we got started recruiting the students and everything, we encountered some challenges. Instead of getting 150 students, we ended up with only 70 students. And of that, only 35 paid. So from the $600,000 revenue we thought we were going to get, we only had $120,000. And I had gone and rented rooms for 150 people. And the contract that I signed, because I was so optimistic, there's no room for exit from those 150 rooms. So I had to pay for all the 150 rooms. And, you know, and so that was a big lesson for me in terms of, you know, being optimistic as an entrepreneur. When you get started, you always believe your projections, you think everything's going to work, but clearly it didn't work. You know, another failure I had was in that business plan for the academy. I said we were going to open in 2 years, and it was going to cost us, and we would become sustainable with just $4 million of investment. It took us 4 years before we opened, and it has taken $100 million of investment, and it's still not sustainable. So we underestimated the amount of capital that we would need by 25 times. And you know, we thought it would open much sooner. So you know, so those are many failures. Being overconfident, being overly optimistic, not being realistic in projections and everything like that. But on the other hand, you know, what's also been exciting about being an entrepreneur is that even though I underestimated what I could achieve in the beginning, so I overestimated what I could achieve in the beginning, I also underestimated what I could achieve in the long term. Because, you know, it's one of the things that Bill Gates has a saying that says most people overestimate what they can achieve in 1 year and underestimate what they can achieve in 10. Right? So in my case, in a case as ALU and AL Group, you know, at the time when we wrote the business plan, we were only planning to open one high school in South Africa with, you know, to train 6,000 people. That was the vision 15 years ago. I had no idea at the time that that would evolve into the African Leadership Academy, the African Leadership Network, which today has 2,000 members across Africa, you know, a network of CEOs and entrepreneurs across the continent, like the Davos of Africa. I never thought it would evolve into something called Global Leadership Adventures, which is a summer program that trains young people. It has now expanded to 50 sites in 25 countries. And this year we took 5,000 students on the summer program. That one way we were struggling to get 150. This year we took 5,000 people to 50 sites in 25 countries around the world. And then I never thought it would evolve into the African Leadership University, where we already have a campus in Mauritius, one in Rwanda, two in Rwanda, and one in Kenya. We have 4 sites already open in the last 3 years. And we have 2,000 students across these campuses. And where we're going to develop 3 million leaders. So I completely underestimated that we would have achieved all this in the same time frame. But in the beginning, I completely overestimated what we could achieve. So, you know, these are some of the things that, you know, today, the only thing, whenever I start a new venture or, you know, as we are building the African Leadership University, you know, the only thing I can be sure of is that we're going to keep failing. But those failures are simply learnings. They're simply opportunities for learning. And, you know, I don't get, I don't let it get me down. I don't lose my optimism, because you have to remain optimistic. You know, because eventually you will figure it out, and eventually you will succeed. You have to just have faith, despite your failures. And if you do, that's how you're going to be successful as an entrepreneur.
Very inspiring. Thank you, Fred. Let's talk now. You were talking about manpower in Africa, which is going to be 4 billion at the end of the century. 50% of the graduates in Africa are unemployed. How do you see a solution?
Well, one of the reasons they're unemployed is that the institutions that are training them don't see employment as one of their purposes, right? So if you think about most academic institutions, you know, universities, they see themselves as knowledge enterprises, not skills enterprises, right? So they want to give people facts and figures. They don't give them skills that employers are looking for. So one of the solutions is that you need to really reorient academic institutions to understand that their client is ultimately society. It's not the professor's interest. It's not what they think, they want to study, but really what does society need? What do employers need? What problems need to be solved in society? And so we've done that, for example, in establishing ALU. We did research with 150 employers to find out what are the skills they find missing in college graduates, right? And they told us we want people who can work in teams, who can communicate, who can think critically, who can manage projects, who can analyze data and make decisions with it. So we designed a curriculum that makes 100% of our students in the first year go through that, right? And they learn those skills. So we need to really reorient institutions to give people skills that make them highly employable and not just academic facts and figures, right? The other thing we think needs to happen is that you need to blur the barrier between education and work, right? So today you go through 21 years of your life purely in academia, and then suddenly you get into work and you never experienced work. And employers looking for work experience and you don't have it. We think you need to have an intermediate period where you're doing education only, and then there must be a period where you are going in between education and work, right? And then finally you do work more full-time. So here at ALU, our students spend 8 months on campus and 4 months in the work every year. So by the time you graduate and you start for your first job, you already have 1 year of work experience, right? And now you're not fresh and you're just theoretical, you have practical experience. We also believe that you need to bring the real world into the classroom. So from the first month when students come to the university, they are working on problems for companies. So, our students here in Mauritius, for example, did a project for Uber, where they were helping them figure out which is the next country they should expand to in Africa. They did a project for L'Oreal, helping them figure out the digital marketing strategy for Africa. They did a project for, a company called 1 Acre Fund based in Rwanda that is doing work with farmers all across Africa, helping them to figure out how they can deliver better services to them. So managers from these companies give our students hard problems that they are working on. And then our students form teams, and then they do consulting projects, and they deliver their work to these managers. And they learn how to work in the world while they're here in the school, right? We bring professionals and executives to come and interact with them and teach them and so forth. So you really need to blur that barrier between education and the real world. And then finally, I think entrepreneurship has to be a key element of all education, right? Because we need to create people who are going to come out not looking for jobs, but who can create their own jobs, right? And in doing that, and this must be done not just in universities, but in vocational schools, in primary schools, in secondary schools. And I think vocational education is a key need in Africa, right? Not everyone needs to go to university. You can learn some vocational skills very quickly. You look at, Germany and Switzerland, they're great examples of this, right? Where, there are many skills that quick people can get in 3 weeks, in 6 months, and they can, if you infuse that with entrepreneurship training, you can really boost on employment in Africa. And I think these are relatively simple solutions that we just need to do.
Okay, thank you. I know you have a huge network of CEO and people in Africa. I saw you with Barack Obama a few months back. If you receive $1 billion, where will you invest in Africa?
In African Leadership University. No. What I would invest if I had $1 billion, I would use it to create a venture capital fund for young entrepreneurs, right? Because Africa's greatest wealth is young people, and the nice thing about young people is that they are naive, and therefore they are more likely to be more innovative. Because if you're naive enough to imagine better ways of doing things, right? And so many great ideas exist amongst young people in Africa. One of the reasons I went to Stanford for my MBA was, I wanted to see whether there was anything special in the air or the water in Silicon Valley. Because I couldn't understand why is it that, all these amazing entrepreneurs come out of Stanford and Silicon Valley, right? The founders of Google came out of Stanford, the Yahoo came out of Stanford, Cisco came out of Stanford, Hewlett-Packard came out of there. So I said there must be something special about the water that they drink in Silicon Valley or the air. So I said, I'm going to go there. But when I ran there, I realized that there's nothing different about the water and the air in Silicon Valley. The only difference is that a 17-year-old kid with an idea is taken seriously, right? And they invest in a 19-year-old Steve Jobs, and then they create an Apple, right? So those same people, the founders of Google were 21 when they started, right? Those same people exist in Africa. There's nothing different about it. The only difference is that we don't give that 17-year-old, that 19-year-old, or that 22-year-old an opportunity. We don't invest in them. We don't take them seriously. So there's a big need for venture capital investment. I think that some of the greatest opportunities for solving problems are going to come out of here. I mean, Elon Musk is a South African, right? You know, and there's many, many, many more of him that exist in Africa. And so some of the greatest entrepreneurs in the world are sitting here on this continent, and the only thing they need is someone to believe in them and to give them opportunities, whether it's skills, like we're trying to do, but also capital. And I think if we do that, this is going to be a source of innovation and prosperity, not just for Africa, but for the world. Because many of the world's solutions actually can be solved by harnessing its biggest untapped pool of human capital, which is right here in Africa. And that's what I would do. I would invest that $1 billion into youth entrepreneurship and really unlock some prosperity for Africa and for the world.
Okay, thank you, Fred. I think we can summarize everything you said by we have to push the world to invest in human capital. Is that right?
In African human capital.
In African.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you, Fred. It was nice talking to you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.